Wait, this is not a sales video. This is a quick tutorial on how to sell using content. And the best converting content for sales is webinars, but not the kind of webinars you're probably used to. Listen, we both know, it's no secret. People are jaded when it comes to webinars, and you know what? They should be, because most webinars have no content, and they're all hype, and they're all high-pressure sales. But wouldn't it be cool if you could make sales without doing all of that? Think about it. Your audience would love you, and you'd have greater authority, you'd have greater credibility, you'd create a lot more goodwill, and you'd stand head and shoulders above everybody else, and hey, you'd probably make more sales. You interested in doing that? Well, here's how to do it. There's really a simple 5-part structure you can follow for any content-driven sales presentation that works wonders, no matter what you're selling. I'll give you a second to grab a pen and paper, and then I'll draw it out for you. Okay, let's go. So here's your piece of paper, and what I'd like you to do is just draw 6 lines through the piece of paper, actually 5 lines, and that's going to give you 6 different sections of your piece of paper. All right, so here's your piece of paper, and then we're just going to number each section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So let's talk about the first part of any sales presentation that's going to help you increase your sales, and that part is called the confirmation. And here's what that means. The confirmation is really simple. It's just a brief introduction of who you are, and it's a statement of what you're going to cover. And it just takes maybe a minute or two. Now, the second piece is something you call the difference. And here's what the difference is. Here's the fact about your audience. They are jaded, right? No matter what industry you're in, they're probably jaded. It's probably not the first webinar you've ever been on, and they're probably pretty skeptical about whether or not they should even listen to you in the first place. Well, most people want to talk about how great they are, but here's the trick. During the difference phase, what you want to do is you want to address their skepticism head on and explain why your webinar is going to be different from everyone else's. And the purpose of these first 2 parts of any webinar or any sales presentation is really to quote unquote sell the viewer on staying for the rest of the presentation. That's it. All right, so now that you've done those first 2 pieces, the next part is something called the story or bond. So here's what the story or bond is all about. What you want to do is you want to describe how you discovered whatever the cool stuff is that you're about to share with them on the webinar. And you want to bond with the audience, if possible, using affinity. So if you're an entrepreneur and they're entrepreneurs, you want to use that affinity to bond with them. Now, here's something really, really important. The reason people are jaded on webinars, aside from them not having any good content, is because people usually make the webinar about themselves. Ultimately, the webinar is going to be about your audience and what they want. It's never supposed to be about you or how great your product is. Now, assuming you've got that part out of the way, the fourth part of your webinar is something called the payoff. Now, let's talk about the payoff. The payoff is the reason why they came. They are coming to your webinar because they want to learn something. So obviously, this is the most important part of your webinar. So you've got to create great value before you ever ask for a sale. Otherwise, you're going to be just like everybody else. However, there's a really easy way to do it. Here's how you do it. So I call this the easy way to help people, all right? So what I want you to do, maybe on the back of your piece of paper, is draw something that looks like this. You're going to take one side of the paper and you're going to draw a little circle and you're going to write bad results. And then on the other side of the paper, you're going to draw a little circle and you're going to write good results. And then we're going to drive an arrow that goes from bad results to good results. And what this is basically representing is the fact that in order for someone to go from bad results to good results, they kind of have to go on a journey and they have to do some stuff, right? Well, what I want you to do now is I want you to draw a little marker for every step that they have to do to go from bad results to good results. And you know what? Let's just draw the first 3 most important steps, right? So you just want to draw step 1, step 2, and step 3. So let me give you an example of how to do this. Let's say we're teaching someone how to go from single to being in a relationship, right? So there's some things that they've got to do in order to go from single to being in a relationship. So let's take the 3 big things they've got to do to give you an example. So our first thing our second thing, and our third thing. So we'll just draw the 3 lines. And then step number 1 here would be they have to learn how to go up and introduce themselves to someone, right? So if we're dealing with single men who want to be in relationships, we have to teach them how to introduce themselves to women without being terrified and without looking stupid. Easier said than done, by the way. I know, right? So, of course, the first thing we want to show them is, well, here's how you dress, so you look nice. And the second thing we might do is, here's what you say. And the third thing we might do is we might want to show them, here's what not to say, right? So, simple. That's the first step. Those are the 3 main components to get them past that first step. So now we're going to go to step number 2, and that's, of course, is, well, once you've introduced yourself to them and you're in conversation and you guys are kind of getting along, how do you get the phone number, right? So we're going to teach them how to ask for the phone number, what to say on the call, and, of course, how to ask the person out on a date once you've gotten them on the phone call, right? And so finally, the final thing we're going to show them is how to go about having the date, right? Where do you take the person? Where do you go? What do you do? And of course, most importantly, what do you not do, right? So those are the 3 big chunks of content broken down into little step-by-step pieces. So that's how you really put together your payoff. Now, here's the big thing to remember about the payoff phase of any webinar or sales presentation. What you want to do is you want to be sure to give the big picture. What you don't want to do is bog them down. So you don't want to bog them down with tons of minutia. They'll get bored and they'll get overwhelmed and they'll leave. And what you always want to make sure that you can do is you want to make sure that your content is something they can use right now to get some of the results that they're trying to get. Remember, the more results we give them in advance of asking for a sale, the better chances you're going to have of actually getting the sale. So let's go back to these 6 parts of a webinar. So we talked about the confirmation where you introduce yourself. We talked about the difference where we say, here's how this webinar is going to be different. We talked about the story and how to tell a story really briefly about how you discovered all the stuff you're going to share with them. And now we just went over how to create content that is actually valuable to them and is going to make them want to know, like, and trust you and buy from you, right? So the next phase is something we call the transition. So what is the transition? Well, the transition is where you go from content to making an offer without feeling or sounding all weirded out. So this is usually where people start to stumble when they get nervous and intimidated and it gets hard, right? So here is a sample language pattern that you can use. I call it the summary plus and if language pattern. So I know that sounds really strange. It's really just 2 little sentences. So let's talk about the first part, the summary. In the summary part, that's where you basically just summarize what you just told them. So if we were using this dating webinar example, the summary part would sound maybe something like this. We would go, so that's how to go from being single to having a relationship. Really simple. We just kind of summarize what we just said. And then we go to the and if part. So here's where we would say, and if you're serious about being in a great relationship, here's how I can help you. And then, boom, we would just transition right into the next phase, which is, of course, the offer. So let's talk about the offer. This, of course, is a critical step that most people get wrong. They're either too hype, either too high pressure, or they get really, really freaked out and they just stumble all over themselves when trying to make the offer. Well, in fact, there are really 12 steps to making a great offer without being high pressure or obnoxious. But you want to know something? The offer really isn't the most important part. In fact, the most important part isn't even the webinar. Here's the deal. To go from registration to getting a sale is really more than just a webinar. There's a lot more to it. So most people, including your competition, thankfully, are going to put all of the emphasis on the webinar itself. Well, yeah, the webinar is pretty important, but it's not the only piece of the puzzle. You see, there are 2 other pillars to making a webinar presentation actually successful. The first pillar is something we call indoctrination. This is a little process that occurs between the time they register and the time that they show up on the webinar itself. And the purpose of it is to make you look good, to make them feel like they know, like, and trust you, and of course to get them to actually show up and to show up predisposed to buy. The third pillar, which is aside from the webinar itself, is something we call the post-webinar sequence. This is designed to teach people who attended but did not purchase to actually buy from you. And here's what's important. we never use a recorded replay during this part of the process. If you do that, all you're going to do is just teach people to never show up on your webinar. So I'm not talking about bombarding them with the replay of the very same webinar that didn't work the first time. It's in fact entirely different. And you know what? If you'd like me to teach you all of this stuff for free, I'd really be delighted to do it. I've created a special training where I show you, number one, how to make sales before the webinar even starts. Number two, I show you how to use indoctrination to increase attendance and make the audience feel like they know, like, and trust you before they even show up, so they'll be more likely to buy from you when they get there. Number three, I'm going to give you screenshots, examples, and walkthroughs showing you how to do 6 phases of a content-rich webinar that sells. So no stone will be left unturned. Number four, I'm going to show you how to use NLP language patterns to pre-sell your offer without being all weird or salesy. And number five, I'm going to reveal all 12 steps for making an offer on your webinar that actually converts without being even remotely obnoxious or salesy. So if that sounds good to you, here's what I want you to do next. You can either click the link in this post or click the button by this video if you see one. And when you do, you'll be taken to a really simple registration page where you can get registered for the training. The training, of course, is totally free, and you'll also get handouts and worksheets so you can take notes. And listen, I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it for you, and I really look forward to seeing you on the training. So if you like this, go ahead and get registered now because you're going to love the advanced training that I've prepared for you. Thanks so much for watching this, and I hope you have a great day.